Welcome, everyone. Hello, and thank you for joining us early this morning. I'm Jackie Brenner, a pre-med student who has enjoyed meeting other STEM students from around the world through my TikTok and Discord STEM Potential. It's been almost a year now since we've started STEM Potential, which is an online Discord that provides networking for students to share their unique experiences and perspectives from diverse backgrounds. And we have over 12,000 students from over 105 different countries, and Discord members can act as mentors and mentees as they progress along the stages of their education while finding friends with common interests. I want to give a shout out to all the members of the STEM Potential team for working really hard to put all this together and making it possible. I couldn't do it without any of them. I created these webinars in order to combat the lack of mentorship and representation that I noticed in the STEM fields. Lastly, I want to introduce Ashini. You can turn on your camera. She's the Vice President of STEM Potential, who I met through the 7-year BSMD program at Penn State in Jefferson. And now she's a first-year medical student. I could not embark on this journey without her, and I feel so fortunate and proud to have her as my best friend. We will both be moderating the sessions this weekend. And now to our panelists, please turn on your cameras and let us know if you have any trouble and send Ashini or I a note in the chat. I am proud and humbled to have assembled a group of incredibly successful medical students. Please note that today we are sharing students' opinions and advice about the medical school admissions process. We have not received any direct information from admissions departments, nor are we an official accredited business in this space. This session will be highlighting 3 medical students from UCLA that have unique perspectives and stories on how they were accepted into medical school. I will start off by allowing each panelist to give a 2 to 3 minute introduction, and then we will move into the main webinar. Let's see, everyone's on. So maybe Teddy, you can get us started.
Sure, thanks, Jackie. Hi, everyone. My name is Teddy, and I am a 3rd-year med student at UCLA. They actually call it the David Geffen School of Medicine at UCLA. My undergrad experience comes from UC Berkeley. I graduated in 2015. And I took, I think, 2 gap years before pursuing medical school. And I am a member of the LGBTQIA community.
Thank you so much. And Arun?
Hi, everyone. I'm Arun. I am a MD PhD candidate between UCLA and Caltech. So my med school is part of UCLA, same as Teddy. We're in the same year. And I'm doing my PhD at Caltech in systems bio. I went to undergrad at Cornell, graduated in 2016, and afterwards did research at Rockefeller. And yeah.
Awesome, thank you. And last but not least, Ristos.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jackie, and hello, everyone. Welcome. My name is Christos Corellis. I'm in the same exact year as these guys. We all started together in 2018, I think it was. And now both Arun and I are completing our PhDs together at Caltech. I'm also in the MD PhD program. My background is in bioengineering with an emphasis on signal processing and machine learning, so I have a bit more of a computational background. But nowadays my work is related to neuroscience, computational and systems neuro.
Very cool. Well, thank you guys for those introductions. We're going to now move into the first part of the webinar. So we have 1 MD candidate and 2 MD PhD. So my first question is, why did you decide to pursue like that route MD PhD or just MD? And why did you pick UCLA? Maybe Arun, you can start us off.
Sure. Yeah. So I think that at least for me, MD PhD is more of a research oriented program. Like if you have an inclination to want to become like a professor and a research-oriented professor, MD PhD is really the route you want to go, because as an MD, you're really just practicing to become a physician, a clinical physician. But it doesn't give you the exposure you need to research to become, to do basic science research. And I really wanted to sort of do both to some capacity. I would actually want to do a little bit more research than clinical medicine. And for that reason, I applied for MD PhD.
Maybe Histros, you can give us a bit of background on why you decided to pursue MD PhD.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I think you'll find some of my answers will be quite similar to Arun's just because of the nature of our situations. Although I think one difference between myself and Arun, at least for the time being, is that I have a pretty like clear and focused idea of what I want to do, and that is a 50-50 split between research and clinical practice. And it's not entirely necessary to do this kind of thing through MD PhD, but as Arun said, it gives you a lot of exposure to the basic sciences. In my case, I'd like to do something surgical, like combine surgical practice with basic science research related to the patients that I'm working with and the samples that I have access to. And you don't necessarily need to do an MD PhD. It's just the PhD is really helpful on the research side of things.
Nice. And maybe Teddy, you can touch on why you picked UCLA.
Yeah, of course. Also to talk about why I picked MD over MD PhD, I virtually have very to almost no research experience. I tried research, dabbled it for a little bit in undergrad, hated it. Actually got like a undergrad position for research, and my first day, I realized I'd have to be in lab and not out in the sun, and I was like, this is not for me. And so I realized very quickly. So it's important that you figure these things out. I wish I had known back then the difference between basic, like wet research when you're in like a basic science lab versus clinical research. I think that would have definitely tailored my experiences maybe more towards clinical research had I been more familiar with that. But why I picked UCLA, I think I picked UCLA because we have great like rapport with one another. I think each class is very close knit. Like I love Arun and Christos. I think we've been on many class trips together, and it's an absolute blast getting to know everyone in my class. And our study space is phenomenal.
That's good. I think that, hearing about Arun and Christos, you guys are so busy with research. So going back to Teddy, beyond being a student, what extracurriculars are you involved in? Because I think this will help lead us into the portion, part 2, talking about your application. So what are you guys doing now? Maybe Teddy, you can start us off.
I have more free time nowadays, so it may not be the best example. I'm in my gap year right now doing research, clinical research. So right now, I think I'm playing tennis maybe 2 to 3 times a week. I'm trying to cook off when I can, but I think primarily I've been focused with just doing a lot of like projects on the side. But I guess when I was in my earlier like 2 years of med school, I think our like first year and a half, it was actually pretty fun. I would define like the first year and a half of med school as like probably like one of the most fun times of your life. We went to Coachella, we we went to Mammoth as a class.
That's good to hear. So I think let's move into part 2 now and jump right in. So is there a specific part of your background and upbringing that was important to bring up on your application that you didn't realize was important until recently or as you were writing your application? Maybe Arun, you can start us off. That's a big question.
Interesting question. I'm not sure. So interesting part of my background that I now realize was important. So my whole application, I think, was very tailored to research, in the sense that like, I think in my application, I talked about like high school science fair projects as part of my personal statement to like, because honestly, that was how I became really interested in the idea of, you have a question and here's a way you could find the answer to that. And I think like for whatever you want to do in your career or whatnot, if you have some sort of compelling story that shows like you've been passionate about a certain subject, doesn't have to be research. That's what the med school admissions are really looking for. They're just looking for like passion and true interest in the subject that you're going for. Yeah.
Well, thank you. I feel like a lot of times, through going through the application process, you usually don't think back to, oh, let me talk about research or some type of experience in middle school or high school. So I think it's important to, know that you can jump into those experiences. Maybe Histros, you can follow up with that question as well.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point to draw on one's more distant past. I mean, very frequently we'll get caught in like during the application cycle, like, oh, have I checked my volunteering box and my research box and my X classes box? Some foundational stuff, some foundational information for like what gets you going, what set you off on this path in the first place. And it doesn't have to be terribly extensive, just a couple sentences, an idea or two of like why are you doing this? Like, was it? I'm pretty sure for everyone here, it wasn't like, oh, I woke up just one day and I magically decided that I want to do medicine and here I am. Like, there's a story to it, and some of us are better storytellers, some of us are not so good. It's okay. I personally am not terribly good at creative writing, but like it's okay if you just like put whatever it was down on paper and speak from the heart. Like adcoms will see that. Adcoms will recognize that. And it's not like you have to come in with like, oh, I have a fixed path that I want to follow. I did say that I was like one of these people, but I think that's the exception rather than the rule. For the most part, I think it's okay and it's very, very normal if you don't know exactly what you want to do on the way into med school, and that's okay. You don't need to say like, oh, I'm laying out my clinical plan for the next 15 years in my personal statement. Just have motivations and come from a good place, and like the rest of it you'll figure out. I think for most people, once they get to third year of medical school, they switch specialty preferences like 2 or 3 times anyway. So whatever you think your plan is going to be is probably going to change anyway. So don't stress the hard storyline too much.
Thank you for that. And maybe Teddy, you can touch on that question as well.
Yeah, of course. I think to echo what Christo said, I think it definitely helps to be genuine and authentic, and you want to find a voice that is like most authentic to you, whatever that may be. Like for me personally, if I had done the research route, I just don't think like Arud and Christos personally, I know them both. Like they can talk your ear off research. It's actually really entertaining watching them just like bounce off each other because they love research, and I just do not have that passion. So I think I could never give that voice. So I think my voice was something that I had to discover was right for me. And I remember like even before like applying to med school, I think my dad was very dismissive, and he said like, you need to do research, otherwise you're not going to get in. And that is not always true. I think research does help. It does strengthen an application, but you can also parlay and funnel your strength through other means. And so I just think you have to think, what have you done in your experiences that would, one, be interesting to talk about? It doesn't always have to be related to medicine. It can just be interesting things that you've done, and your passion will speak for itself.
So I think this is great. And I want to take a step back now and dive more into like taking us, really looking into how you don't have to do research, or like Histro said, you don't need to check off that box. It's like research clinical experience. So my next question, bear with me. I feel like a lot of times students believe you need to cover the big 3: research, clinical experience, and shadowing to get into medical school. But I think that sometimes the most important experiences are those that are not necessarily medically related, but show characteristic traits that you're hardworking, et cetera. So can you guys expand and describe one experience that wasn't necessarily medically related that you believed was integral to your personal growth and application process? For me, I worked in a kitchen, and I feel like that was, huge in my application. And in addition, I also know that students don't always have access to medically related experiences, and those are hard to obtain. So I want to highlight what other experiences did you have on your application, because there are those 15 you need to fill out, that you had on there that really made you stand out as an applicant. Big question. I'll give you guys a moment to think. Maybe Histros, you can start us off.
It's a very good question. I mean, I think the approach you're taking to this is quite good, and that normally people address the boxes, but you're like, I acknowledge the boxes. Now, what else do you guys have? What else do you have that separates you out? I think for me, a very like interesting one to discuss and an interesting one to live through and experience was when I was on a student council at UCSD. Now, let me explain, because like student councils aren't anything out of the ordinary. UCSD is split up into 6 different colleges, and I was a member of one college, Warren College. But I never lived on campus, so I never like physically was at Warren. I was at a different one, 6th College at the time. The name might have changed though. I don't know what's going on with UCSD. But anyway, so each of these colleges have a student council. And because I was commuting from off campus, I was living off campus, I would spend all of my time in a space that was called a commuter lounge that was run by a commuter senator. The senator was a member of the governing body of Sixth College, the Sixth College Student Council. And what ended up happening at one point is I was well integrated into the Sixth College social group, but I wasn't a sixth student. And the year changed, I think, from my freshman to my sophomore year. And during that time, nobody from Sixth College wanted to take on the position of Sixth College student senator, or a commuter senator, sorry. So the senator, the sitting senator, approached me and talked to me about taking on the responsibility of this position. The trouble would be that it would be a hard-fought battle, because in the bylaws, it's stipulated that if you want to be on the council for a college, you need to be in that college, and I wasn't. So what I ended up needing to do is I ended up needing to like draft a speech and go address the sitting council and like make my case for why they like would want to take me. And I mean, it was a pretty challenging case to take because, you know, these people who are on the student council, they're like very focused on the excellence of their college and they really respect their own bylaws, et cetera, et cetera. So I needed to basically argue my way into like this student council in order to have the opportunity to take on this leadership role. And ultimately it did work out. I did end up getting a majority vote from the counselors, and they made a one-year provision for that year only. I would be able to take on the role of the commuter senator. And it ended up being particularly challenging because the friction didn't really end there. Like all throughout the year, whenever I wanted to request funding or put on events or like participate in college-wide activities with commuters, there ended up being some friction. And it was a really good logistical and like bureaucratic interpersonal experience, like learning how to navigate these tough waters. And as you said, a completely non-clinical context. This is like, we need to put on, you know, events for people who are coming from off campus, or we need to like host a music fair or something like that. So it was really interesting trying to like navigate all of those relationships.
And I definitely think like when you're filling out that application, you know, they say briefly explain the experience, but more focus on what you learned from it. So to go back to you for a second, can you explain like maybe, you know, a little more like when you were writing that up on your application, what did you necessarily say? Like, I think the question that they ask is like, what did this teach you? Because it ultimately is like, how is this going to contribute to you being a good physician? So maybe expanding how you wrote that up.
Of course. So to tie it back, I think, so when you're in the middle of conflict, it's very easy for things to feel personal. But at the end of the day, you need to remember that, you know, everyone's just an individual who's got their own troubles, who's got their own perspectives. And for the most part, everyone's a rational and logical individual who can be reasoned with. And as long as you keep a level head, don't make things personal, don't make things petty, just explain yourself and then stop, allow for silence, and let the other person speak their mind to really understand where they're coming from. You can make a lot of progress in this way, even if it feels like somebody can absolutely hate your guts. In medicine in particular, it's going to be even harder because like these are rational, normal people for the most part, but they're also scared. They are probably encountering one of the worst days of their lives when they're coming to you. So all of those affordances that you're normally given in social interactions, all of the politeness and the courtesy, that sort of goes out the window, and you need to be able to handle what I just described, but under even more duress. And it's okay if you're not particularly comfortable doing that for now. You've got many years of training in order to get you up to speed, to get you to the point where you can handle those kinds of relationships and those kinds of interactions that are much, much more difficult than ones you would encounter on a day-to-day basis. But yeah, this experience really opened my eyes to like how being patient and how being understanding can help move things forward for the greater good, even if it feels like, you know, you're fighting an uphill battle.
No, thank you so much for sharing. I like how you said, you know, in the middle of conflict, it feels personal, but not necessarily end of the day. Maybe Arun, you can now give us an experience you want to highlight that wasn't necessarily medically related.
Sure. Yeah. So I think that was a beautiful example that Rista shared because, you know, the whole idea is, as Jackie, you have mentioned, what med school admissions committees are trying to see is that, you know, you have experiences that, you know, give an idea that you are responsible, you care about others, you have maybe some leadership abilities, just some qualities that would make a good doctor, you know. They're not trying to go for check boxes of, okay, this person has done research, this person has done community service. They're looking for dedication and indicators that you will be a good person and be a good physician. So like I had a lot of other sort of activities that weren't med school related, especially because I didn't even think about med school really until like maybe junior year of college. Um, but I was always just doing things that were interesting to me, and I think everyone should be doing that. So like, for example, like in college, I was a part of an a cappella group, and that was a big part of my life. Um, and I was a president for a year of that. And that comes with its own struggles of, you know, how do you be a leader of a group that are your closest friends, where you have to tell them, you know, to do certain things that might rub them the wrong way, but they're also your friends, but you also have to lead them. So there's this weird dichotomy of how do you talk to someone who is very close to you, but, you know, guide them in a direction that, you know, helps the group. And that's something that, you know, will come up as a physician as well. If you have to speak with the patient about something serious, even when they might not want to talk about it, right? So all aspects of life, I think, are valid when you're talking about these experiences. It could be really anything.
Good morning, Arun. It's the weekend.
Okay, Google.
Currently in Pasadena, it's 57 degrees and mostly sunny.
1 second.
Today, it'll...
Okay, we have a blizzard here. You know what? You don't need to make me jealous.
Yeah, so bright and sunny in Pasadena today. But yeah, the overall gist is it can be anything. Just speak from the heart and it'll be okay.
No, thank you for sharing. I feel like, you know, echoing what you said, all aspects of your background and upbringing are important, and they can all relate to your application. So you guys highlighting it is really helping. Maybe Teddy, you can go into one experience, not from your gap year, because I want to ask about that after, because I love that story, but maybe picking one experience from college or even high school that you brought up.
Yeah, sure. So I played competitive tennis when I guess throughout high school and in my college experience, and I was captain of my club tennis team. And we were able to, fortunately, when I was captain, win 3 national championships. And I think med school, I actually had a few interviews that just asked me about my experience in that position. I think they really liked it. So you can have other experiences that are not medically related. I played tennis a lot in undergrad, and I think I needed it. I unfortunately am not blessed with the gift of voice like Arun. So you kind of have to work with what you've got and really like put your eggs in that basket. Personally, I never did it for med school. I think I just did it because I really like it. And when you do those kind of things, I think it really shows in your application, even though people are like, oh yeah, like you're just doing it for med school. Like, no, it really shows when you are passionate about like what you like doing.
I think something that I want to highlight is like what you guys all have in common is like you took your passion and you became a leader in that area. You know, so a lot of people will think like, oh, I need to do 1,000 things, but you know, picking one thing and then excelling at that, I think is definitely important, even though it's not medically related, you know, a cappella, tennis, etc. So now I know that Arun and Teddy took gap years. I don't know about Histros, but maybe we can move into this question because I get it a lot. So if you took a gap year, what did you do during it and how did it contribute to your application? Start with Teddy again.
Yeah, so I took 2 gap years, and during that period, I worked as an MCAT instructor for Princeton Review, and I taught in Berkeley. Realized I did not enjoy doing that, and so I minored in French in college, and I studied abroad in France as well. So I was looking for some experience before med school that would get me to be exposed to a more like French professional environment. So I worked in a nonprofit, an NGO for women's empowerment. It dabbled both in being a fashion company and also helping the country's poorest by selling couscous. So in Morocco, there were these cooperatives that essentially very poor women band together to try to pool all their resources, and my organization was giving out microloans to them. And so essentially my job was to take their story and make it marketable to a Western crowd. And we were able to get their products sold to Whole Foods, Africa.
Thank you for sharing. Maybe Arun, you can tell us what you did.
Sure. So on paper, the main thing I was doing during my gap years was doing research at Rockefeller. And that was actually a really formative part of me deciding to do MD PhD, because I was actually really on the boat. I didn't even know I was going to apply for MD PhD previously. But Rockefeller is a sort of unique place where it's a very small place. There's only like 80 or so professors, but you have some of the top-notch professors of the world there. And, you know, I got to see a certain side of research that I'd never seen during my undergraduate years, where, you know, you'd have 80-year-old, 90-year-old professors who really can't do much anymore physically, but they're still coming into lab every day because they're just curious to see the next experiment. And I would also see this sort of thing where one of the things that annoyed me about research is sometimes it's a sort of positive loop, positive feedback loop, where you do research to get grants, and then those grants help you do research, but then the research you end up doing is just to get more grants. And you're really just not contributing fundamental knowledge. You're really just doing small research just for the sake of continuing that cycle. And at Rockefeller, I saw a lot of professors just, you know, saying no to that system, and they would spend 5-6 years on really big papers, but they would only publish every now and then. And it was really focused on the science and the fundamentals. And that's, you know, when I realized that, wow, this is something really amazing and something I could dedicate my life to. And that's how I became interested in research. Through my professor, I was able to shadow MD PhDs as well as MDs, and I got to formulate my own opinion that, you know, I think MD PhD is the right path for me. So if there's any sort of hesitancy with taking a gap year, I would say it shouldn't really be that much of a concern. At the end of the day, your life is long, and you really want to make sure you make the most educated decision you can. And also, a gap year is a lot of fun. Like, I lived in New York City. It was a very fun time. I learned about how to manage my own like personal finances, how to rent an apartment. I almost got scammed once. Like, there's just a bunch of different things you learn about, and it, you know, it makes you a more complete human being in a sense. Like, I would say my gap years were some of the most formative years of my life.
So to follow up to that, you know, if someone is considering taking a gap year, like what influenced your decision to take one, or how did you know, like to like take that next step, and for how long if you took 1 to 2 gap years rather than, you know, one?
So I think, so sorry, go ahead, Teddy.
You can go ahead.
So I think a lot of the time people take gap years because they need a little bit of extra time, which is totally fine. But for example, like if you decide your senior year you want to apply to med school, you have to study for the MCAT, so that takes a little bit of time. So often people take gap years. But also, if you're undecided, a gap year is a really amazing way for you to be able to just step back from college, step back from your classes and say, okay, let's figure out what I really want to do in life. Maybe I'm in between the fashion industry and medicine. So spend the time in the fashion industry and also shadow doctors during that time. Like, it's a really great way for you to judge for yourself what you want to do when you grow up.
Or maybe Teddy, you can follow up.
So I was responding to a webinar attendee. I would say for me, I definitely needed a gap year to just mature emotionally. I don't think I had enough time to process like med school and what all of that meant when I was an undergrad. And I think I needed a few years just to reflect on that. And I also don't think I had taken enough time to just like know how to sell myself. So the way I approached med school admissions was, and I hate to say it, but I think it is like important to know that you almost have to think of it as a commodity, and there is probably a better way of selling yourself than there are others. So I think you have to fine tune, like, how can I be the most marketable to med schools? And I think finding your voice, finding your spike, as some people will say, that is probably something that will definitely help your chances if you can identify like what parts of my application do I want to enhance and make like more known. And I think all of that was done during my gap year. I think it really helps to have as many people look at your application as possible. And with your personal statement, I had all my close friends read it, and all of them had to go through the process of like, no, like this part doesn't really seem like you. Like, I don't think you would ever say it. Listen to them. I think sometimes like we have a tendency of being like, no, I want to put this, but I think your close friends know when you're being your most authentic self. And I think there is a way of capturing your voice and makes it both your story personal and also very unique. And it's the way you deliver your lines and phrasing that make it unique, not necessarily the entire experience. Because I think everyone will have similar experience, but it's the way you say it that really makes you like your unique applicant.
I think that was, couldn't have said it better. Definitely want to come back to that point on personal statements, but I wanted to ask Histros first to speak a little bit about what he did for his gap year, kind of, because I know you did a master's, so maybe you can expand on what made you decide to do a master's rather than research work for an NGO, and what you got your master's in.
Yeah, of course. So my master's was also in bioengineering. I initially started off trying to do a BSMS. So it's the kind of program where you do your bachelor's, and then in the last year of your bachelor's, you start taking grad classes. And then instead of taking 2 years to finish your master's, you just take one extra one. I ended up taking 2 years anyway, just because research, more papers. And it's funny that Teddy, well, I mean, I guess it's not terribly funny. It's a very common theme, I think. It's a maturity thing. I think the master's was also critical for me because more time just passed, and I sort of like grew and developed and matured, like mentally and psychologically, in terms of like the focus that I wanted to have in terms of clinical medicine, in terms of like the scientific ideas and the research that I was doing. More time just means more time to read and more time to think. And it's not critical just for research, for any like professional, academic, intellectual activity that you want to do. Taking more time to think critically about it and, you know, consider possibilities, think about the things that you want to do. I think it only lends itself positively to whatever application you're going to put out moving forward. That's not to say it's necessary. I mean, I have plenty of friends. We have plenty of friends in our class who applied straight out of their 4th year of medical school. All that's required there is a little bit more focus and a little bit more preemptiveness. Like from the 2nd or 3rd year of undergrad, you need to start getting your ducks in a row, and you need to start having things lined up so that you're applying during the last year of undergrad, and then you get accepted and matriculate immediately afterwards. But yeah, very, very strongly would recommend considering at least one gap year if you think you could use a little bit more time. If you're unsure, honestly, if you're even asking the question, then chances are the answer to gap year is probably on the side of yes. I'd be willing to bet.
That being said, also, I think gap years are becoming increasingly common within first-year med students. So
yeah, it's true. It's true.
And, you know, to follow up with that, someone asked a question in the chat: how do you balance between academics, extracurricular, and the social life? Because medicine is quite a competitive field, and I heard that the higher the grade, higher the chance of getting in. So maybe you guys can touch on that question. And I also think, you know, mentioning a part of the fact that, you know, you take these gap years to give yourself more time to have experiences to write about on your application. And if any of you want to touch on your stats for getting in, because I know Student Doctor Network, the most toxic place on this planet, is like you need a 520 plus or 3.9 to get in, but we all know that's not always true. Maybe Arun, you can start us off.
So yeah, so regarding the question between balancing academics, extracurriculars, again, I think what really helps is you have to do things that you really enjoy. All my extracurriculars, I was doing them because I really liked it. And my extracurriculars were a large part of my social life as well. Most of my friends came from those different clubs and organizations, and that was a lot of fun. And academics, you do have to get good grades, it's true. Unfortunately, like you have to get good grades to get your foot in the door. Once your foot is in the door, then people will be able to look at your application holistically and, you know, see that you're passionate about medicine, etc. Regarding stats, you want specific numbers?
If you feel comfortable sharing, or if you think it's relevant. If not,
Yeah. So yeah, stats are definitely important. So I had a 3.8 about GPA. It's like 3.82 or something. And my MCAT was a 521. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing. Maybe Teddy, you can touch on the question about balance, and then anything else.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I always prioritized friends in college. So I was never the person who was like, wow, like, have you heard of this student? They're amazing and like X, Y, and Z. I think I definitely kept it to doing well in classes and still seeing friends and making time for them and tennis. And so I wasn't like the most outrageous student, but I also didn't slack off, and that can mean not going to parties every single weekend. I think my third and fourth year, like before midterms or even like 2 weeks out from midterms, I like made sure to like just hunker down and like not just like tell myself it's okay to sacrifice like going out events because in the long run it will be worth it. And my GPA, I think it was like a 3.83 and my MCAT was 518.
Maybe Istros, you can touch on that as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think the work-life balance question is one that everyone in the field of medicine is still trying to figure out. It's no secret that burnout is a very big problem, and if you're in the medical profession, not just as a doctor, basically anything, I think you deal with long hours, you deal with adverse work conditions, and burnout is a pretty big problem. That being said, I think I've gotten better about the balance nowadays. During undergrad and during masters, it was a little bit more difficult because you don't have, as Arun said, you don't have your foot in the door yet, and that raises a big old question mark of how much do I need to do in order to like try to ensure that my foot is in the door. And I know everyone listening, I know you guys will stress out about this, like, oh, I need to do more work, I need to check more boxes, I need to get more things on the CV, and that can lead to a certain amount of toxicity in an academic environment, and it's just not good. It's really just not good. I mean, if you're doing activities for the sake of checking boxes or just to further your CV or to have an additional talking point, it really kind of does show when you write about it and when people ask you when you talk about it. If it's something that you're prioritizing because you really enjoy it and you're passionate about it, that's really going to come through. And yeah, as Arun mentioned, you have these passions that you pursue, and those passions will put you in contact with other people who are also passionate about the same thing. And you're going to develop friends this way. So you start knocking out your extracurriculars and your friends in one fell swoop. Sorry, what was the question again? I'm ranting a little.
No, you were on it. That's great. I think now 12:47, being cognizant of the time, I want to bring Ashini in to ask part 3 of the questions, which is retrospective advice, and definitely focusing on COVID, because that is huge right now in terms of applying to med school. So Ashini, take it away.
All right. Hi, everyone. Sorry, 1 second. So like Jackie said, I want to ask you guys what advice you guys have for students applying during COVID, especially because a lot of extracurriculars can't be in person at the moment, like clinical experience, research, shadowing, etc. So if there's anything that you guys any advice you have. Teddy, you can start us off.
Yeah, I definitely think it's worth it to get what or like how like the first years currently have been dealing with COVID. I think their experience and my experience as a first year med student are very different. I think a lot of schools are experiencing this as well. So it's not just like a UCLA specific issue, but it's how do we build a community and have a community while also being cognizant and maintaining social distancing. And I think a lot of M1s are struggling with that right now. They're not able to meet as regularly, even in class mode. So I think you definitely want to just gauge and ask all the students that you can. Like everyone is a possible networking person. So I think it behooves you to like know how the current students are dealing with it. I think students at UCLA, they're being mindful, so they're able to hang out with one another and still foster that social support system as much as possible, but they're not taking like class trips as regularly, or they're not able to just like kick back with like a group of 50 or 60. I hopefully that answered your question.
Yeah, no, it does. I think the social support system that you mentioned is really important, especially given the fact that we're now entering like year 3 of the pandemic. And it's just the roller coaster of like up and downs through COVID. And I can only imagine how difficult it is applying. Arun, if you want to like follow up on that question.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough question because like we didn't really, especially from our perspective, we didn't have to deal with COVID when we were applying to med school. Um, so I think, so maybe I have some experience from it because I entered graduate school during COVID. Um, I mean, it's hard. I think if you can, I think one of the most important things in your med school application is often showing that you have something that you like doing and you've done it for a long period of time. And that shows A, dedication, and B, passion as well. Um, so if you do have some sort of experience that you can continue to do for several years before you apply to med school, I think that will really help your application. Um, I know a bunch of things got canceled with COVID and all, um, but I would encourage students to try to find something that they can do longitudinally.
I think I can actually help a little bit on this one because my younger sister was applying during this cycle actually. So I was helping her navigate through this mess, and I think I have learned a couple of things that might be of use to the people here. So what I will say is the normal crapshoot that exists in applying, it's even worse now. So again, don't take it personally when inevitably rejections will come. They will come en masse. You should probably be applying a little bit broader than you normally would just because of the pressures that exist with COVID nowadays. And yeah, don't take it too personally. It's probably a good idea to not wed yourself to the idea of going to one specific school. I mean, this applies regardless of whether or not you're in a COVID year, but now in particular, because of how crazy and hectic things are, just keep an open mind and try to focus on like what your ultimate end goal is. Like, I think for pretty much everyone, the ultimate end goal is to be a practicing physician if they're here. And it's okay if the training comes from one school and not another school that's ranked, slightly higher by US News and World Report in terms of total research funding. Like it's going to be okay. You will be a physician anyway. Don't stress it too much. In terms of activities, it's true that a lot of things were locked down, but I think one thing that could potentially help is, and if this isn't something that you've done already, then maybe something that you should think about implementing either now or over the next year for the next cycle afterwards. Something COVID related in the perspective of service. So there are many services that have been disrupted like over the course of the pandemic. And it is a little bit, it used to be tougher to volunteer for things in the past, but nowadays between boosters and like mask abundance and all these things, it's easier to get a little bit involved. It doesn't have to be something clinical. It can just be like at a local nursing home or something like that, going and lending a helping hand. I'm sure there are plenty of local businesses that also could use similar kinds of assistance just because of the working shortages that exist now. It could be, I've heard of students doing like epidemiological things related to COVID, like working on questionnaires and like compiling information pamphlets and things like that. Basically, the pandemic has created a lot of opportunities for you doing things to help other people in the context of the pandemic. And med schools are going to ask you, what did you do during the pandemic? Because they want to know what the deal is. You know, you're going into a service-based profession where there is a spirit to some extent of self-sacrifice in terms of the greater good. And they want to know, what did you do? How did you take your time and apply that to help other people during the pandemic? So having something like this, it doesn't have to be anything crazy or major, but having something like this to talk about will really help, because on every application that you encounter, there will be something like this. So you're going to have to talk about it.
Right. And I think what you said also about really just finding anything in your community kind of goes back to how we were talking about earlier, that there are like a lot of experiences on your application that aren't necessarily medically related, but tell a lot about you as a person. So I think that could be useful also to all of our attendees. So our last question for today is, if you could go back in time and do it again, would you do anything differently? Either with your application or your route to getting to where you are now. Teddy, if you want to start us off.
Yeah, I don't think I have that many regrets with how I got to where I did. I think, if anything, I would probably just want to echo that taking a gap year, even if people say it may not be the best path for you, if you yourself believe that you need the extra year to just, one, figure out your application, and two, also find experiences that would strengthen whatever you're looking for, I think it's worth it. I think that would be my only thing, was just being more sure of myself and what I was doing. Because I think I had a lot of people around me were saying, oh, like, you know, like it's gonna be really tough for you to try to find, sorry, I'm getting texts. It's gonna be really tough for you to find motivation to apply for med school after you're coming back. I will say, I will caution, you definitely want to get your MCAT out of the way before you go on your gap year and do other pursuits. I think that might be the only thing that I could have foreseen as being difficult if I had to work and do something else, and then after that coming back having to study all these different topics. I think having the MCAT be out of the way before I did all that was like a huge like burden off my back.
Sorry, I was muted. Arun, if you want to follow up on that question.
Sorry, what's the broad question here?
If you could go back in time and do anything differently, what would you do?
I don't think so. I mean, there's always things you can say, hey, I could have gotten a little bit better grade in this class, or I could have done a little bit better on this thing. At the end of the day, these are all formative experiences for you, right? Any mistakes, you learn from those mistakes. And what matters at the end of the day is that you're doing something that you enjoy. So no regrets here. Yeah.
And Ristos, to finish us off.
Yeah, honestly, same. You can spend an eternity in this endless loop of, what if I had done this? What if I had done that? You know, there are probably a billion things one could do differently, and whether or not they ultimately change the results, it's not entirely clear. But it's also not really worth spending mental effort over. I think the most important thing for the participants now is just to take data points, look at the people above you and see what exactly they did to be successful. And your past, you know, it's done. You can't really change anything about that. But if you are trying to take active steps in order to be a more competitive applicant, just take a look at the people above, see what features they had to their application, what stories they had, and how they presented themselves, and see how you can tailor yourself to sort of match the general flavor of like how they were going about building their application, how they were marketing themselves as an applicant. I think it was Teddy who said that we're sort of like a commodity. you know, you're painting a story for yourself as an applicant, and you want to be compelling with that story. You want to be comprehensive about who you are and why you started, all of these things that you're doing. And as long as that story is compelling, then I believe you'll be okay ultimately.
Well, thank you guys so much for that incredible advice. And just to echo what Histro said, I think what you guys have all really highlighted is, while this application process is difficult for sure, and you have to kind of make yourself a commodity, what Teddy mentioned in terms of really asking your friends to read over your personal statements, I think is so important, because what you guys highlighted is the fact that all aspects of your life are important, and it's about picking out the right ones and the right moments from those experiences as well. So I want to thank you guys for also sharing those experiences too. So it's the end of this webinar. So thank you all so much for taking out the time out of your day to participate in this panel discussion. Now that we know the weather is really nice in California, I hope you guys have an amazing day. I know I've learned so much from this discussion today, and I hope that all of you guys learned a lot as well. Your presence here will help guide many students in a successful STEM career. Please note that a recording of this webinar will be available on the Discord soon. I look forward to interacting with all of you on STEM Potential for additional events. So our next event will start in 5 minutes, and it will be Temple. So I want to say thank you to all the panelists one more time. I so appreciate you guys all joining us. I'm just going to stop my camera and mute, and I'll be joining back in a couple minutes. And thank you to all the panelists again.
Good luck, guys.
Thank you very much, Jackie, and best of luck on the cycle, everyone.
Yeah, it's not easy. It's going to be brutal, but I hope everyone the best of luck.